Hey there, I'm Mr. Terry, a high school history teacher, and your favorite fat electrician commentator, back with another History Teacher Reacts video. All right, we got another story to hear, and this time the video is called USS No-Go, America's Invincible Concrete Battleship, Fort Drum. Okay, I don't know what's going on here, but I know it's going to be an interesting story. I have never been let down by a fat electrician story. So as always, I love to insert any history that I can, so I'm happy to have you along. All right, the original video is linked down below. Make sure you're supporting the fat electrician. He's been an awesome supporter of mine, and I want to make sure that gets back to him. All right, let's get started. I know for me, when I think battleships, I don't think of them made out of concrete, but battleship is in quotes. So I don't know what this is. Is it a fort? Well, I mean, it's called Fort Drum, but all right, let's find out. You know this is going to be good.
El Frale, that time the U.S. military-industrial complex decided to play Pimp My Island. Today we're talking
Just
about
heavily,
Fort Drum.
like,
Yes, I realize that's a
ammo
military
it
base in New York. No, that's not what we're talking about. There's another Fort Drum. It's guarding the mouth of Manila Bay in the Philippines. It's also referred to as El Frale Island, America's unsinkable concrete battleship, or the USS No-Go. Basically, the U.S. military took a tiny island and turned the entire thing into a gun, and we're going to talk about it. Right after a word from our sponsor. This video is brought to you by Sheath.
Who we
Okay,
got?
here's the deal. They're like normal underwear,
Undies?
except they're better because they have a pouch that you can stick your junk in, and then your balls aren't stuck to your thigh. And trust me, it's just one of those things you don't know you need it until
Finally.
you need it, and once you have it, you're not going to be able to live without it. Let's
Finally, how long have we gone? How many thousands of years have we gone, men, without really getting a good place for our precious items?
face it, every good thing that's ever happened to you in your entire life would have been a little bit more gooder if you didn't have balls stuck to your thigh the entire time. And I know what you're thinking.
Okay.
What if I don't have balls? That's cool. Were you with people that did? Because if you were, they probably would have been in a better mood if balls were stuck to their thigh the entire time. You should buy them these underwear. Don't.
Okay, I know you didn't come in thinking we'd be talking about this, but is anyone else call when it gets stuck? Anyone else call it getting bat wings? Okay,
Believe me,
let's
ask
move
the
on.
kangaroos. Those marsupials have known how awesome pouches are for like 15 million years. They've
That
been
just
hoarding the
creeps me out.
technology, but now Sheath is here to fix that. All I'm saying is give it a shot.
Become
Worst case scenario,
kangaroos.
you find out you actually do like having balls stuck to your thigh and these underwear aren't for you, and in which case, Sheath has a 30-day, no questions asked, money-back guarantee, and you're out nothing. I'm gonna have a link and a discount code down below. Let's get back to the video. So why on earth did America turn an island into a giant gun? Well, our story begins in 1898 during the Spanish-American War. Why is
Mini
America
Death
at war with
Star.
Spain? To be honest, I'm kind of blanking out on that right now.
Wait, sorry, I missed the time.
The video. So why on earth did America turn an island into a giant gun? Well, our story begins in 1898 during the Spanish-American War.
Okay.
Why is America at war with
Spanish-American
Spain?
War.
To be honest, I'm kind of blanking out on that right now.
Blame the main on Spain. Colonial competition in the Caribbean. Spain is in control of Cuba and other places there. So there's definitely some American interest there. Same with the Philippines. The Philippines has been the Spanish's trade hub from their treasures of the Americas to sail across the Pacific Ocean to, trade with China and other parts of the world too. Plus the event, the main sinking American ship was blamed on Spain, which again, very much quotes there, and got the Americans into there. It's just a little bit of American imperialism, which is a big deal at the turn of the century with our great imperial president, Mr. Teddy Roosevelt.
Statistically, it's probably because they messed with our boats, so let's go ahead and double check that together. How did the Spanish-American War start? The USS Maine mysteriously exploded in a Cuban harbor, believed to be the Spanish. See, I was right. It's always the boats.
It didn't really go through much investigation before the government was like, war with Spain. One of those just showing we were ready for war.
Every single time. Honestly, at this point, Jordan Peterson needs to go back and rewrite his book, because he actually wrote a book called 12 Rules for Life, and the fact that not fucking with America's boats wasn't rule number one seems like an oversight on his part. Anyways, so America sends a bunch of boats into Manila Bay.
It's debatable
Spanish. While
how
they're
that went
headed
down.
into Manila Bay, they passed this tiny little rock island called El Frale, and on El Frale there was a bunch of Spanish artillery that basically tried to ambush all the American ships. It didn't really work, but it was a super good idea. Fast forward, America wins the Spanish-American War, takes control of the Philippines. So now with America in charge, they decided...
The Cuba one was kind of interesting because the United States is going to kind of hold on there. And Philippines also did not get independence. In both of these scenarios, what ended up happening is the U.S. would support the locals because they wanted to fight, whether it's like Cuba, the Philippines, fight them because they were sick of Spanish rule. But then, and what ended up happening is just the U.S. took them over. It wasn't until after World War II that, like, the Philippines, for example, got their independence.
They wanted to be able to
But
defend
I mean, I've talked to Filipinos. They did say it was a lot better. It was definitely a lot better than like during the Japanese occupation.
And they remembered back to how the Spanish almost
want to
had
find
a
a positive
successful
thing.
ambush by putting artillery on El Fraile, and that's when the Americans in charge said, hey, hear me out. Instead of putting artillery on El Fraile, what if we turned El Fraile into artillery? So the engineer was like, okay, here's the plan. We're going to level the entire island perfectly tabletop flat, and then we're going to build an enormous concrete bunker on top of it with 2 battleship turrets, each of which having 2 12-inch guns on them. So
Okay, I'm seeing a concrete battleship.
Sends those off to the War Department to get approval, at which point the War Department is like, hold on, let me get this straight.
Actually,
you
a pretty
want to
good
level
idea.
an entire island, build an
not very
enormous
big,
concrete bunker on top of it, and then you want to equip it with 2 battleship turrets, each of which has 2 12-inch guns that we're going to have to manufacture in Watervliet Arsenal in New York and ship them all the way to the Philippines. To which the engineer is like, yeah, that's exactly what I want to do. And the War Department is like,
I bumped those numbers up. Those are rookie numbers in this racket.
because we're going to do 14-inch guns, each of which is going to be shooting 1,600-pound shells. If somebody tries
I was gonna say, there's in the United States, like it's seemingly being this incredible feat, but it has to do with the military. So it's like, it's not an obstacle. It is in no way an obstacle. The government's gonna go.
We're
in
literally going to start shooting cars at them till they go away. So they start construction in 1909, and it takes them 5 years to finish. And what they end up with is Fort Drum. Its concrete is anywhere between 25 and 36 feet thick. The top deck is completely reinforced with
looks
steel,
like a ship from the
essentially
top.
making the entire fortress completely impervious to any weapon that exists at this point in time. Then the guns on top are 14-inch M1909 guns in a dual turret that was specially manufactured just for Fort Drum, and it is the only place they were ever used.
Look at the scales. Can you see on the left? Hard to see my cursor. On the bottom left, you can see this guy there. So it's freaking huge. Just looks cool.
This turret has armor that is 8
Wonder how much it was
inches
used.
thick, virtually making that impervious too. Then, just in case being able to shoot cars at people you don't like while being inside of a bunker that makes you impervious to retaliation isn't enough, it also has 4 6-inch guns and 2 3-inch anti-aircraft guns. And inside the bunker, they have 6 months worth of food, their own power plant, and a distillery so that they can make their own clean drinking water.
Yeah.
Basically, it's the world's best doomsday bunker.
Dude,
so it's
could you have a fort and not have it be completely full of liquor? I actually don't think it's possible.
completely done. It's like 1914. America has built this incredible weapon, and now, in true American fashion, we're not really going to use it until it's borderline obsolete, and then we're going to give it away to somebody else. So, kind of fast forward through the next 20 years. I mean, there's always Army guys stationed there and on hand in case anything happens, but nothing ever does. It's kind of like being stationed on a naval vessel, and because of that, the Army guys that serve there give it the nickname the USS No-Go, considering it never fucking goes anywhere. Then, of course, during that same time period, World War I happens. After World War I, America downsizes their military considerably. Then the Great Depression happens, and because of that, pretty much no upgrades or maintenance gets done to Fort Drum during that entire time. So
I'm interested to see her because the Japanese invasion of the Philippines is going to be coming up here in the early 40s. I'm interested to see if they used it then.
for its first 2 decades, it receives pretty much no upgrades. It's already becoming obsolete. Then in 1934, the US government comes out and says, over the course of the next 10 years, between 1934 and 1944, America is going to move towards establishing the Philippines as its own sovereign nation. So obviously, they're also going to turn over
That'll
Fort
wait
Drum
until
to
the war is
Philippines,
over.
and because of that, they have even less motivation to do any upgrades to it, so none get done. Then during that 10-year time period, World War II kicks off in 1939, but America's not getting involved. We're minding our own business, and by minding our own business, I mean we're basically
42.
funding the entire thing through Lend-Lease, but you know, we're not involved. Then Pearl Harbor happens in 1941, aka somebody fucks with our boats, now we're going to war. Less than 10 hours after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese show up in the Philippines, they invade, the American forces are not ready, and they all get driven down to the Bataan Peninsula, which
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people actually forget that Pearl Harbor was just one part of a much larger attack. Other possessions were, again, like the Philippines, that was a big one, and ended up being really taking the Americans for, I guess you'd say, surprise. They weren't even close to being ready, and that's why you got those thousands of troops that ended up getting left behind, basically ordered. FDR makes MacArthur, who's the general there in the Philippines, leave, and they had to leave thousands of troops, and that's where they got Bataan Death March happen, where they capture those guys, thousands of them, march them in a very deadly march to prison camps, and a lot of them died. But Pearl Harbor, was one of many sites that was going to be attacked.
which, as you can see, is also at the mouth of Manila Bay with Corregidor and Fort Drum. For like the next 5 months, while American and Filipino forces duke it out with the Japanese on the peninsula, Fort Drum is pretty much shooting at any Japanese vessel that gets anywhere near it. The Japanese vessels are returning fire at Fort Drum. They're launching air raids, trying to bomb Fort Drum, none of which is effective at all. Also during this time, the Marines and soldiers stationed at Fort Drum rip all the buildings on top of it off, throw that shit in the ocean. They also tear down the 60-foot search tower and get rid of that as well.
It did look like it got some hits, though. Looks pretty cratered, huh? Is that from that on the side facing us, too, if you can see? Is that like a big hole in it? Is that from World War the Japanese attack?
That shit in the ocean. They also tear down the 60-foot search tower and get rid of that as well. That way, the massive turrets can do a full 360 and be able to shoot in any direction. Then, April 9th, 1942, Bataan falls, and the only thing left is Corregidor, Fort Drum, and 2 other small coastal
forts. Are little islands,
for weeks
so
after this,
not
the
mainland.
Japanese shell both Corregidor and Fort Drum with naval gunfire, as well as conduct bombing runs. Fort Drum is pretty much completely impervious to all of it, which infuriates the Japanese. Corregidor, on the other hand, is nowhere near as fortified, and they are hurting bad. Because of this, the majority of Corregidor's defenses have been completely destroyed, and the only thing defending Corregidor now is Fort Drum. On May 5th, 1942, the Japanese would launch an amphibious attack on Corregidor. Fort Drum would land direct hits on 2 Japanese landing craft, destroying them completely, infuriating the Japanese even further.
It's so obnoxious. It's so obnoxious to sing because it's like this little gnat, right? Mosquito or something in your room. You cannot get rid of it. Okay, you can't. It's too small.
Wasn't enough, and Corregidor would fall on May 5th. The concrete
Americans return later, 2 years later.
Men manning it are now the last holdouts in the Philippines against the Japanese, and it is pissing the Japanese off. And in immediate retaliation for them taking out several of the Japanese landing crafts at Corregidor, they begin launching air raids against Fort Drum, and they are, again, completely ineffective. During those air raids, some of the Marines manning the anti-aircraft guns would manage to shoot down a Japanese bomber, only serving to piss them off. At this point, General Wainwright, the man left in charge of American forces in the Philippines after General MacArthur abandoned his men and fled to Australia.
Now, it said abandoned. Was I wrong in saying didn't FDR order him out? Tell him to leave? Correct me there. Who's right, who's wrong on that one?
Issued the order that all American forces were to surrender on May 6th at noon. At this point, according to the legend, the entire crew of the USS No-Go, aka Fort Drum, gets together and they have a conversation and talk about whether or not they want to even follow this order because they think they can go toe-to-toe with the Japanese forever inside of this concrete monstrosity. Unfortunately, they would come to the realization that this decision had already been made for them because at some point, the distillery that purifies their drinking water became damaged, and without U.S. ships being able to bring them water, they weren't going to be able to hold out. So given that
that's what I was going to say. Well, even with food, and there's no way to resupply this thing. It's in a pretty vulnerable area. Can't be forever.
To surrender tomorrow, but they still want to fight. They decide, hey, let's get rid of all this ammunition that we have. And they fire at the Japanese ships non-stop as fast as they can for like the next 18 hours straight. And apparently, according to legend, it got so hot inside of Fort Drum that it was able to increase the muzzle velocity of the guns, and they were able to score more hits on Japanese ships that thought that they were out of range. And they continued to fire non-stop until 11:50.
Didn't like warp the guns or anything.
Finally forced to surrender at noon. They then proceeded to sabotage the guns, the power plant, and flood as much of Fort Drum as they possibly could, making it useless to the Imperial Japanese.
Yeah, because it's freaking awesome.
At the time of their capture, all 240 men were still alive, and only 5 of them had been injured after weeks of combat. They would then be taken as prisoners by the Imperial Japanese, where the majority of the men would be tortured, starved, and worked to death, and it is believed that less than 30 of the men at Fort Drum returned home after World War II. Fast forward,
man, POW camps in World War II, man, being in those Japanese ones, and it was so brutal. Again, look into the Bataan Death March if you haven't heard of that. It's horrific, man.
For 3 years, 1945, America is now winning the war in the Pacific, and they have returned to the Philippines to reclaim them from the Japanese. At this point, Fort Drum is believed to be completely inoperable, and nobody has seen anything that would suggest otherwise until in April of 1945, an American PT boat would get a little bit too close, and Japanese machine guns would begin firing upon him from Fort Drum. This intel gets sent up the chain.
They rebuilt it a little bit.
Nobody really knows what's happening. Maybe they're trying to restore Fort Drum and use it. Maybe there's just a bunch of Japanese soldiers that are being barracks there. Who knows? Either way, Uncle Sam says, you know what? That's mine. and I'm gonna need it back. So
Oh.
at first they try to bomb it with planes. Obviously that's not gonna work.
That doesn't
It
work
didn't
for anyone.
when the Japanese did it. I don't know why they thought it would work now. Then they send out a cruiser to shell it with naval gunfire. Again, obviously it doesn't work, at which point shit proceeds to get out of hand pretty quick. Basically the chain
And then see, and now it looks like it's becoming annoying to the Americans like it was for the Japanese. Just show how, like, strategically how genius this thing really was.
didn't really know what to do, so they're like, hear me out. Let's just give the blueprints for Fort Drum to an entire platoon of Army combat engineers, aka the demolition men, and tell them to get rid of it, and the sooner they do, the sooner we all get to go home. So the engineers take the blueprints, they go come up with a plan. I don't really know how long it took them. I presume
Like
about
they
the same
landed
amount
on
of
it?
time it takes them to smoke a cigarette. That's probably not a coincidence. They come back to the chain of command. They're like, okay, here's what I need. All right, we're gonna need an entire company of infantry, 1,000 gallons of gasoline, 2,000 gallons
How
of
is this
diesel,
worth it?
all the incendiary and white phosphorus grenades you can
Oh my
find,
God.
a 30-minute fuse, and a camera guy, because you're going to want to get this shit on video. And apparently the chain of command is like,
Oh, is there video of
okay.
it?
So a couple days later,
there video
April,
of it?
Friday the 13th, 1945, the U.S. forces launch Drum D-Day. 2 American ships pull up, drop landing ramps onto Fort Drum, and all the infantry and combat engineers run out to secure the deck, at which point they start taking fire from one of the 6-inch guns. They all return fire, including the ships, until that 6-inch gun stops. Then they secure the entire deck, and the combat engineers get to work. The engineers then run a hose up onto Fort Drum and begin pumping 3,000 gallons of gasoline and diesel into the air vent of Fort Drum.
Ooh, they're gonna blow it up. They're gonna blow it up. So yeah, the best thing it seemed like for invading this that like Japanese and stuff didn't do is just you got to just send troops. You got to surround it if you want to really take it out, because what are those big guns going to do against, you know, individual guys? Okay, this is getting crazy. Are they going to like just flood it and then just light it up, explode it from the inside? The Japanese going to be coming out
They
of
then
this.
proceed to put 600 pounds of TNT, a bunch of white phosphorus,
They're
and
just gonna-
incendiary grenades on top of it, rig it up to a 30-minute fuse, light it, and fucking run. They hop back in the boats, they sailed a safe distance away, and then they waited and they watched. And this is what they saw.
Boom.
That explosion was so powerful that it shot the 2,000-pound hatch on top of Fort Drum 300 feet into the
Okay, I want to watch this again.
boats. They sailed a safe distance away, and then they waited and they watched.
Let's go
And this is
slow-mo
what
on
they
it.
saw.
Okay, let's go slow-mo. I figured out. Okay, frame by frame here. Here we go. Okay, wait. It was too early. Okay, there's the explosion. We'll go frame by frame. Boom. I'm trying to see. Can we see the top part that he's saying? Is that what the top is there? Something's launching up. Do you see this? What do you see? Whatever this is this like a barrel or something? See at the top there? Yeah.
That explosion was
Okay,
so
yeah, you
powerful
could
that
see
it
something
shot
blow
the
up.
2,000-pound hatch on top
Something
of
solid.
Fort Drum 300 feet into the air. And if you watch the video a little bit closer, you can actually see the hatch punch through the top of the mushroom cloud before falling back into the
Yeah.
smoke.
Oh, okay. He did it in a way better
The
way.
diesel fire
Okay, yeah,
inside
yeah.
of Fort Drum then proceeded to burn for 5 days straight, officially putting an end to any hopes of ever restoring it to
Nobody
its former
got out,
glory.
huh?
In the coming months, American and Filipino forces would reclaim the Philippines, Japan would end up surrendering, World War II would come to a close, and the next year, on July 4th, 1946, the Philippines would gain their independence, becoming their own sovereign nation, and thus taking control of Fort Drum, where it still sits at the mouth of Manila Bay, pretty much in the
So
same
rusted.
condition that America left it, serving as a powerful
120 years
reminder
old.
to not mess with America's boats or anything that even kind of sort of looks like a boat for that matter, okay? Just don't. Thank you for watching. Best way to support the channel is go buy some merch over at thefatelectrician.com. Quack bang out.
Okay, final thoughts. All right, that was an awesome story. That's the coolest fort like I've ever heard of. And to see how successful it was and impervious it was, that just made it even more interesting. So, all right, another great story that our friend the Fat Electrician was able to come up with and share in such an interesting way. So anyways, thanks you all for hanging out, and we'll see you next time.